Yo, what's going on, APUSH peeps? We have chapter 9 of America's history for you today. This one is titled Transforming the Economy 1800 to 1860. Also, make sure you check out the description below for videos that match up with not only the new curriculum, but also this chapter. I do have specific videos to reinforce key ideas from this chapter. So let's get started talking about the American Industrial Revolution. We're going to start off talking about the division of labor and the factory. Now, whether it was at home or a factory, work became more rote or the same and efficient by doing specific tasks. This is where we see the introduction of very primitive assembly lines where workers would have one specific job to do over and over. This is seen in slaughterhouses, especially in Cincinnati, which has so many slaughterhouses that becomes known as Porkopolis, and also in shoe factories as well. Now, the British, they have control of most of the textile industry in the world at this time. And the British government forbid mechanics and machines to leave Britain. So they did not want any other country to be able to use their ideas. Now, Samuel Slater, he was a guy from Britain who emigrated to America in disguise. He dressed himself up and he was able to sneak out of Great Britain. He memorized plans for a factory, and he is known as the father of the factory system in America because he memorized these plans, brought them to America, and then America began to use many of his ideas. Now let's talk about American and British advantages in the textile industry. The U.S. had a tremendous amount of natural resources, way more than Britain had. And the U.S. also instituted tariffs on foreign goods. This was part of Henry Clay's American system, and we see tariffs in 1816, 1824, 1828, 1832, and 1833. This was a way to promote American business over foreign competition. Britain, however, had a larger population, and they had a lot of people that were willing to work for very little money. The U.S. improved on many machines that were from Britain, and we have the Lowell system. This develops in Massachusetts, where local farmers' daughters began to work in factories, and these were young women. They would live in boarding houses that were provided by the employers, and they had strict curfews, and there was no alcohol and other rules for them to live by. However, this did provide a lot of independence for women. Women were making money on their own, and they were able to provide for themselves. So between the years 1820 and 1860, the U.S. patents increased drastically. And a patent is when you apply for an invention so that others cannot copy it. Eli Whitney is a hugely important person I'm sure you're familiar with. Most people are familiar with him inventing the cotton gin in 1793 that separated cotton from its seeds, and it increased the ability of one worker to separate seeds from cotton, which helped lead to an increase in slavery because slavery exploded as a result of this. More farmers wanted more land to grow cotton. More cotton equals more profits. He also, Eli Whitney, invented interchangeable parts. And these were used for guns and later applied to other areas and other industries. Now, I always think of interchangeable parts as a cookie cutter. And if you were to use this heart-shaped cookie cutter here, every single cookie would appear to be that same exact shape. Now, interchangeable parts were parts that would be the exact same. They would come from an identical form similar to a cookie cutter. This allows for goods to be increased at a much faster rate, and this has a huge impact on factories. Goods are produced at a much faster rate. They become more abundant, and they also become cheaper, so it helps out consumers who are buying these goods. We begin to see the development of unions, and the whole purpose of a union is to bargain with employers. And early American law viewed unions as illegal, as did British common law. So it's really not until 1837 in the Massachusetts State Supreme Court case, Commonwealth versus Hunt, that unions are viewed as legal. But it takes a while for unions to kind of catch on. It's really more symbolic at the time. Many states and governments are still resistant to unions. It's really not going to be until after the Civil War that we see the union movement begin to expand. All right, let's talk about the market revolution. This is a term that's specifically mentioned in the new curriculum that you should be familiar with. And it is the change in labor systems, population, and transportation. And the big idea is that it greatly affected the Northeast and the Midwest. The South really is kind of left out of this market revolution. Now let's focus on transportation because that's a big part of the market revolution. German and Irish, those two groups made up a large portion of immigrants, and these are known as old immigrants. And old immigrants came from Northern and Western Europe. And I do have a video on old immigration. Check that out in the description below. We had the government building the National Road, which is also known as Cumberland Road, which extended from Cumberland, Maryland, all the way to Vandalia, Illinois. And this was funded by the federal government. And here's a building that you can visit that was built as a stop along the National Road, still there today. Canals and steamboats shrink distance. We see canals are being developed, and the most famous one of all is the Erie-canal, and that connected Albany way over here to Buffalo. And it's very important to note that this was able to connect New York City via the Hudson River here all the way to Lake Erie and the Great Lakes and beyond. So goods could reach as far as Chicago via the Erie Canal, because goods would ship down the Erie Canal, meet up at the Great Lakes, and then extend out west. So this allows for goods to be shipped farther and faster and more cheaply as well. And canals and roads changed the environmental landscape of the United States as well. Other canals soon emerged that connect more of America together. The Erie Canal is probably the most famous one, but there are many other canals as well. And we see that the state government subsidized or helped pay for canals, whether they were in the form of direct payment or tax breaks for companies that would build these canals. Now, canals are soon going to be replaced by railroads, and it's especially going to be during and after the Civil War where this railroad boom will really take off. Livestock and wheat would be transported between the two regions of the North and the Midwest via railroad. Again, think about that market revolution connecting those two areas. And there are some inventions that helped farmers. We have the McCormick Reaper and John Deere's steel plow. The Reaper would allow farmers to harvest their crops, and the steel plow would allow farmers to break tough soil and begin to plant their crops. And the South did not invest in manufacturing like the North and the Midwest did. Rather, they continued to rely on agriculture, especially cotton, and they really just make their bed and keep investing in cotton, which will lead to more issues later on. We see that the market revolution increased the number of cities and towns in the United States, and cities begin to emerge as trading and manufacturing centers. You have places like Cincinnati and Buffalo, my two favorite cities. I used to live in Cincinnati. I currently live in Buffalo. Also, Pittsburgh, Chicago, these big cities really develop as not only manufacturing centers, but trading centers as well. And many of these are right around water. And that's important because of shipping. Buffalo with the Erie Canal, Cincinnati with the Ohio River, etc. Okay, so let's talk about the impacts of the market and the Industrial Revolutions. This is what we really want to focus on. We see that there are larger houses, better clothes, cheaper products, and distinct social classes that emerge. So let's talk about the business elite. Prior to the market and industrial revolution, social classes regularly interacted and dressed similar. And afterwards, the wealthy dressed in finer clothing. They had carriages that they would ride on, and they also had servants. You begin to see more of a distinction between the wealthy and the middle class or working classes. Employers and employees worked alongside each other less, so rather you see the management start to not work alongside jobs with employees. Now let's go to the middle class. This group is made up of farmers, merchants, lawyers, etc. And this is a very powerful emerging group. 30% of the population in the 1840s in the Northeast was made up of the middle class. So this really begins to emerge during this time in the antebellum America. Middle class wives bought books, pianos, lithographs, you name it. So there's this new social class culture that begins to emerge with the help of women. And middle class children received a high school education. Most people during this time really only went to school through 5th grade, but there's this push for middle class children to receive a high school education. And that kind of reinforces this idea of Republican motherhood, in which the mothers would be the caretakers of children and would encourage them to get an education and become good contributing citizens of American society. So let's go over to urban workers and the poor. Poor workers were especially hit hard during economic downturns, whether it is the Panic of 1819, the Panic of 1837, 1857, you name it, the poor workers are really, really hurt. Children would often have to work to help provide for families, children as young as 10 years old, and God forbid if a parent were to die in a family, children would be even more relied upon to help make up some of the wages. The benevolent empire, we're going to focus on religion now. And this is a religious movement to reduce alcohol and other vices. And here's a very famous picture that you should be familiar with. This is from the 1840s, and it shows the transition from drinking by yourself, just a glass, all the way to eventual death or suicide as a result of alcohol. So these are the different stages of the destruction of alcohol, at least under the interpretation in the 1840s. You see down here that there's this mother and daughter, it looks like, or at least a child, that is kind of left alone to deal with the mess of alcohol. So this movement encouraged governments to ban carnivals, which would allow excessive drinking. And they also improved society by creating homes for orphans and asylums for those with mental illnesses. And women played a very large role in this movement. You should be familiar with this woman, Dorothy Dix. She was influential, and she was able to get better treatment for the mentally insane by having different asylums for them. So she advocated or favored better treatment for the mentally insane. And many laborers or the working class really resisted this movement, especially laws restricting activities on Sundays or the Sabbath day. And one reason they did so was because a lot of people were working 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. And their thoughts were, listen, all we want is one day to kind of have to ourselves to be able to let loose and do what we want to do. So you really see this tension between the working classes and the upper classes that are trying to restrict some of the behaviors of the working classes, especially when it comes to alcohol. All right, Charles Grandison Finney. He is a very important person that is part of the Second Great Awakening. He played an instrumental role. He helped convert many people during the Second Great Awakening. So he preached this evangelical belief, and he believed that individuals had free will, that anybody could be saved. So he was not in favor of the Calvinist predestination doctrine. He believed that anybody could have a relationship with God and anybody could be saved. This resonated with wealthy individuals in Western New York and Buffalo, Rochester, and that area. This district was known as the Burned Over District. And the poor and immigrants were not as affected by his message. It was more of the middle and upper classes. Let's go back to temperance again, this idea of limiting the consumption of alcohol. We have the American Temperance Society, which becomes a very powerful society. At one time, it boasted 200,000 members nationwide, and people promised to abstain or stop drinking alcohol. It was very influential. You would even have little clubs of the offshoots of this as well, in which children would encourage people to stop drinking. All right, we're going to go down to immigration. Very important. This is a part of the new curriculum as well. We have old immigration, which is made up of mostly Germans and Irish. Again, they're from Northern and Western Europe. And one reason why the Irish came here in such large numbers was the Irish potato famine. Take a look at that potato. That's called the potato blight. It's this disease that affects potatoes. Imagine you're eating a potato and you bite into that thing, huh? How nasty is that? Well, this led to the death or emigration of millions of people from Ireland, and they tended to come to the United States and settle in cities in the Northeast. They also were Catholics, and they tended to vote Democrat, and that would lead to a lot of tension between Protestant Americans and those who were not Democratic and felt that the Irish stole elections or influenced elections too much by voting Democrat. We have this idea that develops. It's called Nativism, and you can see countless examples of Nativism throughout U.S. history. It's the distrust of immigrants. It's when people really want to restrict immigration. And one of the large reasons was that many Protestants feared the power of the Pope. They had this idea that the Pope would influence all these Catholics and really play a large role in the government. That's why it's not until 1960 that you see JFK as the first president who is Catholic. There's this really big fear of the Pope. All right, let's do a quick review of this chapter, the Lowell Girls, and definitely know the Lowell Girls and the impacts of them on women in Massachusetts. Eli Whitney, his two inventions, the interchangeable parts and the cotton gin. Know the impacts of the canals, especially the Erie-canal, and that led to increased trade, the connecting the Northeast and the Midwest. The impacts of the Market Revolution, the same idea, the Northeast and the Midwest. Second Great Awakening, know Charles Grandison Finney. Temperance movement sought to eliminate alcohol. Nativism wanted to restrict immigration and was harsh against immigrants, especially Irish and Germans. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. I hope I was able to clarify Chapter 9 for you today. I wish you nothing but the best of luck on your tests. Check out videos that are matching the new curriculum in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please help spread the word. And also subscribe if you have not already. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it, and have a good day.